Dear friend, tonight we're stepping back in time. We're going to an era when your local barber wasn't just someone who trimmed your hair. They were also your surgeon, your dentist, your pharmacist, and occasionally the person people came to when they needed help with problems that couldn't be spoken about in polite society. We're diving into the peculiar, fascinating, and often terrifying world of medieval medicine, where a red and white striped pole meant so much more than a fresh haircut. Before we begin this journey together, take a moment to tell me, where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? I love knowing that we're sharing this story across different corners of the world, perhaps as you wind down from your day, maybe with a cup of tea, or simply lying in the comfort of your modern bed, about to appreciate just how far we've come. Now, dim the lights if you can, get comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's tale together. You might want to take a deep breath because you're about to discover just how challenging life could be when medicine meant taking your chances with a very sharp razor. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1347, and you are officially a barber surgeon. The good news is you have a job that's always in demand. The bad news is your job description includes everything from trimming beards to performing emergency amputations to helping desperate women with problems. That could get you burned at the stake, if anyone finds out. Your shop sits on a narrow, cobblestone street in a bustling medieval town, marked by that iconic red and white pole, which isn't just decorative, it's advertising. Red for blood, white for bandages, and the spiral pattern representing the tourniquets you twist around limbs, though you're not entirely sure why anyone thought that was good marketing for a business. Your workspace is a fascinating blend of barbershop and surgical theater, though calling it a theater might be overly generous. There's your trusty wooden chair, stained with years of what we'll diplomatically call professional use, carved from oak and worn smooth by countless nervous grips. Your tools hang on the wall like medieval kitchen utensils, sharp razors that you hone daily on leather straps, bone saws with teeth that have seen more action than a warrior's sword, forceps that look suspiciously like blacksmith's pliers, because they basically are, and your pride and joy, a collection of brass bowls for bloodletting, polished to a shine, that reflects candlelight like golden mirrors. There's no running water, which means you wash your hands in a basin that gets changed when you remember to change it. There's no antiseptic unless you count the strong ale you use to clean wounds, and definitely no anesthesia unless you count the bottle of even stronger ale you offer particularly nervous customers. The closest thing to a medical degree hanging on your wall is a faded certificate from your master barber, written in Latin that you can't read, signed by a man who learned his trade from his master barber, who probably learned his from someone who once watched a real physician work from across a crowded street. Your morning routine begins before sunrise, not because you're an early bird, but because medieval people believed that morning light was somehow better for medical procedures, something about the humors being more balanced when the sun first touches the earth. There's no scientific basis for this belief, but then again, there's no scientific basis for most of what you do, so you go with tradition and hope for divine guidance. You sweep yesterday's hair clippings from the floor, most of which is actual hair, some of which you prefer not to think about too carefully, and arrange them in neat piles that you'll burn later in your small furnace. You sharpen your razors on a leather strop, testing each blade against a piece of parchment to ensure they're sharp enough to cut cleanly through skin, muscle, and bone. You arrange your brass bowls by size, from the small ones used for minor bloodletting to the large ones that can hold enough blood to, well, let's just say they're very large bowls. You organize your collection of herbs and powders, checking that the pennyroyal is still fresh, the tansy hasn't moldered, and the mercury powder hasn't clumped together in the damp air. The first customer of the day shuffles in just as the church bells ring for morning prayers, clutching his arm close to his chest. It's old Henrik, a carpenter who's been fighting what he calls the creeping death for weeks now. In the 21st century, Henrik would visit an emergency room, receive antibiotics, maybe have some dead tissue surgically removed by a trained specialist, and be home within days. In your world, Henrik is about to ask you to make a decision that no barber should ever have to make, but that medieval barber surgeons make with disturbing regularity. You examine Henrik's arm in the pale morning light, noting the telltale signs that make your stomach clench with recognition. The flesh has turned black around his elbow, spreading like spilled ink across parchment. The smell rises from the wound like a message from the underworld, sweet and putrid, and unmistakably final. This isn't just an infection, it's gangrene, and you both know what gangrene means. In Henrik's time, there are no antibiotics to fight the poison in his blood, no surgical specialists to remove just the infected tissue, no hospitals with clean rooms and trained nurses. Henrik looks at you with the kind of desperate hope that people reserve for their last chance at survival, the same look drowning men give to passing ships. His eyes are bright with fever, his face pale from the poison that's slowly working its way through his system. You know what needs to be done, and you know Henrik knows it too, but neither of you wants to be the first to speak the words aloud. Sometimes being a medieval barber surgeon means making the hardest choices with the simplest tools, and living with the consequences regardless of the outcome. You prepare your workspace with the methodical care of someone who's done this before, but never enough times to make it routine. Your sharpest bone saw comes down from its hook on the wall, the blade gleaming in the candlelight like a promise of pain. You lay out your cleanest linen cloths, the ones you save for the most serious procedures, and fill your largest brass bowl with clean water. Henrik watches your preparations with the fascination of someone who's about to experience something that will either save his life or end it, possibly both. Henrik's procedure is complete, and while you've never been to medical school, mainly because medical school won't be invented for another few centuries, you've probably just performed surgery that would require years of training in the modern world. The difference is you learned by watching, practicing on criminals and corpses when you could get them, and hoping for the best while praying to every saint you can remember. There's no medical board to certify you, no insurance company to cover malpractice, just word-of-mouth reputation. That spreads faster than the plague itself, and speaking of plague, you really hope that's not what's coming next through your door. Henrik staggers out of your shop minus one arm, but plus a chance at living to see another harvest season. His stump is bandaged with the cleanest linen you own, soaked in wine, and bound with strips of cloth that you boiled in water blessed by Father Benedict. Medieval wound care is part medicine, part prayer, and part crossing your fingers that infection doesn't set in before the healing starts. You've done everything you know how to do, which isn't much by modern standards, but represents the cutting edge of 14th century amputation technology. Your next patient arrives before you've even finished cleaning Henrik's blood from your tools, which is unfortunate timing, but perfectly normal for medieval medical practice. Brother Thomas from the monastery sidles in nervously, glancing around as if someone might be watching, which in a town where everyone knows everyone's business, someone probably is. Privacy in medieval times is about as common as unicorns and considerably less magical. Thomas speaks in whispers that would make a conspirator proud, explaining that he's suffering from what he delicately calls an imbalance of humors, and excess blood that needs releasing. You nod knowingly, though honestly, medieval medical theory makes about as much sense as assembling a cathedral without blueprints. According to the learned physicians who've never actually touched a patient, everything wrong with the human body comes down to four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much of any one humor, and you're in trouble. It's like medieval medicine's version of a personality quiz, except instead of telling you which Harry Potter house you belong in, the results determine whether you live or die, and the treatment usually involves removing something from your body. The theory goes that humans are basically walking soup, and when the soup gets out of balance, you need to remove some ingredients to restore harmony. Blood is considered hot and wet, which sounds like a weather report, but apparently explains everything from headaches to heartbreak. Yellow bile is hot and dry, black bile is cold and dry, and phlegm is cold and wet, because medieval doctors were very concerned with temperature and moisture levels in ways that modern meteorologists would find excessive. You prepare your brass bowl and your sharpest lancet, a small blade designed specifically for opening veins, though it looks suspiciously like a tiny dagger that someone decided to repurpose for medical use. Brother Thomas rolls up his sleeve, revealing an arm that looks perfectly healthy to you, but then again you're just a barber who happens to perform surgery, extract teeth, deliver babies, and occasionally help people leave this world in ways that wouldn't appear in any church records. The art of bloodletting requires you to locate a prominent vein, preferably one that's easy to find and unlikely to result in immediate death when punctured. Medieval anatomy lessons consist of pointing at various body parts and hoping your master knew what he was talking about, which is roughly equivalent to learning to fly by watching birds and hoping for the best. You find what looks like a suitable vein in Thomas's forearm, make a small incision with your lancet, and watch as his blood flows into your brass bowl like medieval wine at a very strange and medical dinner party. The amount of blood you're supposed to remove is determined by a complex calculation involving the patient's age, the season, the phase of the moon, the alignment of the stars, and your best guess about what constitutes enough but not too much. Medieval medicine loves its calculations, probably because math makes everything seem more scientific, even when the underlying science is roughly equivalent to reading tea leaves while blindfolded. Too little blood, and the treatment won't work. Too much, and Thomas might faint, or worse, though worse covers a lot of territory in medieval medicine. There's no blood pressure monitor, no way to measure exactly what's happening inside Thomas's body, just your experience, whatever divine guidance you can summon, and the hope that human beings are more resilient than your treatment methods would suggest. Medieval medicine is part science, part art, part prayer, and part desperate improvisation, with the prayer portion doing most of the heavy lifting, and the improvisation portion covering everything the prayer portion misses. As Thomas's blood fills the bowl, you can't help but notice how pale he's becoming, which could be a sign that the treatment is working or a sign that you're accidentally creating a much bigger problem than the one you started with. The line between healing and harm is thinner than your sharpest razor, and you walk it every single day, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, but always with the knowledge that your patients have literally nowhere else to turn. Medieval patients don't have options the way modern patients do. There's no emergency room to visit, no specialist to consult, no second opinion to seek. There's you, there's prayer, and there's the occasional wise woman who knows which herbs might help and which ones might kill you faster than whatever's already wrong. When Thomas finally signals that he's feeling much better, though his definition of better seems to involve swaying slightly and gripping your chair for support, you take it as a victory and hope that tomorrow he'll still consider it one. After Brother Thomas leaves, presumably to go pray for his newly balanced humors, and hope that God approves of his decision to seek earthly medical intervention, you're faced with the daily reality of your medieval medical practice. You've just performed 2 procedures that would horrify modern doctors, removed a limb without anesthesia, and drained someone's blood based on astrological calculations, and somehow both patients seem grateful, which says something profound about the nature of desperation and the human capacity for hope. It's a strange world, where desperation meets determination, where people are so accustomed to suffering that even dangerous remedies seem like miracles. You clean your tools with what passes for soap, basically animal fat mixed with ash, and hope, sharpen your blades on your leather strap, and prepare for whatever medical emergency might walk through your door next, hoping that whatever it is, it's something you've seen before, or at least something you can figure out before you accidentally make it worse. The morning light grows stronger now, streaming through your small windows and illuminating the brass bowls that still hold the evidence of your morning's work. The afternoon brings a different kind of challenge, one that arrives in the form of Lady Margaret, the cloth merchant's wife, who enters your shop with the kind of nervous energy that suggests she's not here for a simple haircut or beard trim. She glances around to make sure you're alone, pulls her hood up higher over her face, and speaks in whispers that would make a professional spy proud. This is the part of being a medieval barber surgeon that no one talks about openly, the requests that come wrapped in secrecy, desperation, and the kind of problems that could get both of you executed if the wrong people find out. Medieval society has very firm opinions about women's choices, and those opinions are enforced by the church, the law, and social pressure that would crush a diamond. Women who find themselves carrying children they cannot afford to carry, whether for health reasons, financial desperation, or circumstances that polite medieval society pretends never happen, have very few options. There are no family planning clinics, no safe medical procedures performed by trained specialists, and certainly no support systems for women facing impossible choices. There's just you, your questionable medical knowledge, and a collection of herbs that your master swore would help with what he euphemistically called women's troubles. Lady Margaret has a problem that the church considers a mortal sin, the law considers a capital crime, and society considers so unspeakable that it's never discussed except in whispers between women who've faced similar situations. She's carrying a child she cannot afford to carry, and she needs your help to end her pregnancy before it ends her life, her reputation, or her family's future. The desperation in her eyes tells you this isn't a decision she's made lightly, and the fear in her voice tells you she understands exactly what she's asking you to risk. You listen to Margaret's whispered explanation, noting the way her hands shake as she speaks, and the careful way she avoids mentioning specific details, as if saying certain words aloud might somehow make her situation more real or more dangerous. In the 21st century, she'd have access to trained medical professionals, counseling services, legal procedures, and support systems designed to help women in difficult situations. In 1347, she has a barber with a cabinet full of mysterious plants, a prayer that nothing goes terribly wrong, and the hope that you'll be discreet enough to keep both of your necks out of the hangman's noose. You reach for your collection of herbs, carefully stored in small wooden boxes and clay pots, each one labeled with symbols that you hope you remember correctly. Pennyroyal, with its sharp minty scent and reputation for causing the body to reject what it shouldn't hold. Tansy, bright yellow and bitter, known to wise women for generations as a plant that could solve problems that men weren't supposed to know about. Rue, the herb of grace, though there's precious little grace in the situation that brings Margaret to your door. These plants represent knowledge that's been passed down through generations of women who understood that sometimes survival meant making choices that society couldn't acknowledge. The preparation of these remedies is part chemistry, part folklore, part desperate hope, and part ancient knowledge that women have whispered to each other in kitchens and birthing chambers since time began. You measure the herbs according to instructions that were never written down, only passed from woman to woman, wise woman to healer across generations, who understood that some knowledge was too dangerous to put on parchment. Medieval recipe books might contain instructions for cooking meat and brewing ale, but they don't contain instructions for the kind of help Margaret needs. Margaret drinks the bitter tea you prepare, grimacing at the taste, that's somehow both medicinal and ominous, like drinking liquid regret mixed with liquid hope and flavored with the bitter herbs of necessity. The mixture tastes terrible because effective medicine often does, and because the plants that can end pregnancies aren't the same plants that make pleasant dinner seasonings. She forces down every drop, knowing that this moment represents her only chance at controlling a situation that could otherwise destroy everything she's worked to build. The risks are enormous, and not just the medical ones, though those are considerable enough. Medieval herbal medicine is largely guesswork based on tradition, and the dosage that helps one woman might kill another. Too little and the treatment won't work, leaving Margaret exactly where she started, but with the added knowledge that she's now committed a crime. Too much and the herbs that might end her pregnancy could also end her life, making her problem moot, but hardly solved. But the legal and social risks might be even worse than the medical ones. If anyone discovers what you've done, Margaret could be accused of murder, and you could be charged as an accomplice in what medieval law considers the killing of an innocent soul. The Church considers it a mortal sin that would damn both of your souls to eternal fire. The law considers it a capital crime that could result in hanging or burning, and the community would ostracize both of you faster than you could say professional confidentiality, assuming you lived long enough to say anything at all. Medieval discretion isn't just good business practice, it's survival in its most basic form. You dispose of the evidence carefully, burying the used herbs in your garden, where they'll decompose into soil, clean your mixing bowl with boiling water and strong soap, and burn the cloth you used to strain the mixture. Margaret pays you in silver coins that she produces from a hidden pocket in her cloak, money that represents both her gratitude and her understanding that certain services require certain compensations, no matter how dangerous they might be to provide. As Margaret leaves, pulling her hood low and avoiding eye contact with anyone on the street, walking carefully to avoid drawing attention to herself or her condition, you're left with the uncomfortable reality of your profession. You're not just a barber who occasionally removes limbs or drains blood according to ancient medical theories. You're a keeper of secrets, a provider of last resorts, and sometimes the only person standing between desperation and disaster. It's a responsibility that weighs heavier than any of your surgical tools, and one that reminds you daily that in medieval times, being a healer meant navigating not just medical challenges, but moral, legal, and social minefields that could explode at any moment. The afternoon light slants through your shop windows, illuminating dust motes that dance in the air like tiny spirits, and you find yourself hoping that Margaret's treatment works quickly and quietly, that no one notices her condition or its resolution, and that tomorrow brings customers who need nothing more complicated than a beard trim or a tooth extraction. But you know, that hope and reality rarely align in medieval medicine, and that your next patient might bring challenges that make Margaret's request look simple by comparison. Evening approaches with the soft golden light that medieval painters love to capture in their illuminated manuscripts, and with it comes the realization that your day as a barber surgeon has been, shall we say, eventfully memorable. You've performed an amputation without anesthesia, conducted bloodletting based on astrological calculations, and provided herbal remedies that could get you excommunicated, hanged, or both, possibly at the same time, if the church authorities are feeling particularly efficient. Just another Tuesday in the 14th century, where your medical training consists of watch carefully, try not to kill anyone, and pray that God guides your hands. Your next challenge arrives in the form of young William, the baker's apprentice, who stumbles in clutching his shoulder and wearing the expression of someone who's just discovered that gravity is not, in fact, optional. He's been lifting sacks of flour that weigh more than he does, because medieval workplace safety regulations are about as comprehensive as medieval space travel programs, and something in his shoulder has decided to relocate itself to somewhere it definitely shouldn't be. In the modern world, this would be a quick trip to the emergency room, maybe some x-rays to see exactly what's happening inside his shoulder joint, a bit of manipulation by a trained orthopedic specialist who actually understands human anatomy, and possibly a sling to keep everything stable while it heals. William would be back to work within days, perhaps with some physical therapy, and definitely with a better understanding of proper lifting techniques. In your world, it's another opportunity to practice medicine without a license, mainly because licenses don't exist yet, and neither does the concept of malpractice insurance, which is probably for the best, considering what you're about to attempt. Medieval medical practice operates on the principle that if you can fix it, you probably should try, and if you can't fix it, you should try anyway, because there's literally no one else available to do so. You examine William's shoulder with the confidence of someone who's learned anatomy through trial and error, with emphasis on the error portion of that educational experience. Medieval medical knowledge comes from a fascinating blend of ancient Greek texts, translated through Arabic, then into Latin, then interpreted by monks who've never actually seen the inside of a human body, except in very unfortunate circumstances. It's like playing telephone across centuries, except the original message was, "Here's how to fix people." And the final result is, "Here's how to possibly make things worse," while meaning well. The theoretical basis for treating dislocations comes from the works of Galen, a Roman physician who died over 1,000 years ago, but whose medical theories are still considered the absolute authority on human anatomy, despite the fact that Galen learned anatomy by dissecting animals and assuming that humans were basically the same thing with different social customs. Medieval medicine loves its ancient authorities, probably because having someone to blame when things go wrong is almost as important as knowing how to fix them. William's shoulder is clearly dislocated, which you can tell because his arm is hanging at an angle that definitely isn't natural, and he's making the kind of sounds that suggest his pain levels are somewhere between severe and "please knock me unconscious before you touch anything." Dislocations are actually one of the easier things you deal with, because unlike infections or mysterious internal ailments, you can usually see exactly what's wrong and have a reasonable chance of fixing it without making anything worse. The procedure for treating dislocations involves a technique that your master learned from his master, who learned it from someone who once met a real physician at a market and remembered most of what he said. Medieval medical education is largely oral tradition, passed down through generations of practitioners who may or may not have understood what they were doing, but who definitely understood that knowledge was valuable and should be shared, even if the sharing process involved a certain amount of creative interpretation. You position William carefully in your wooden chair, which has developed a reputation around town for being both the most comfortable and most terrifying seat available, depending on why you're sitting in it. You place your hands on his shoulder, feeling for the joint that's decided to go on an unauthorized vacation from its proper location. Medieval anatomy training consists of pointing at various body parts and hoping your master knew what he was talking about, which is roughly equivalent to learning to navigate by looking at maps drawn by people who may never have left their village. The actual manipulation requires you to apply gentle pressure in what you hope is the right direction, while William tries not to scream loud enough to wake the dead, who are sleeping peacefully in the cemetery next to the church and probably don't want to be disturbed by medical procedures. You work slowly and carefully, feeling for the moment when the joint slides back into its proper position, hoping that the satisfying pop you hear is the sound of successful treatment and not the sound of something breaking in a way that wasn't broken before. The wonderful thing about successfully treating a dislocation is that the relief is immediate and obvious. William's face goes from the expression of someone being slowly tortured to the expression of someone who's just remembered that life doesn't have to be constant agony. He flexes his arm experimentally, rotates his shoulder carefully, and grins with the kind of relief that makes all the risks of medieval medicine seem worthwhile. William's immediate improvement suggests that you've actually managed to help someone today without making their condition worse, which is always a pleasant surprise in medieval medicine, and definitely something worth celebrating, though probably not too loudly, because you don't want to attract attention from people who might start asking difficult questions about your qualifications. He promises to recommend your services to anyone else who needs fixing, which is how word-of-mouth advertising works, when literacy rates are approximately the same as space travel rates. As you clean up from William's visit, wiping down your wooden chair, and organizing your tools, you reflect on the strange career path that brought you to this point. You never planned to become someone who removes limbs, drains blood, provides forbidden remedies, and relocates joints, all while pretending to understand what you're doing. You originally just wanted to cut hair and trim beards, but medieval career paths have a way of expanding whether you want them to or not. Your shop grows quieter as the sun sets, and most people head home to their evening meals. But you know that your day isn't over yet. Medieval medical emergencies don't follow regular business hours, and someone always seems to need help just when you're thinking about closing up for the night. You sharpen your tools one more time, organize your herbs, and count the coins you've earned from a day of practicing medieval medicine, wondering if tomorrow will bring fewer emergencies and more simple haircuts, though knowing that hope and reality rarely align in your profession. The evening light fades slowly, casting long shadows across your shop floor, and you prepare yourself for whatever challenge might come knocking at your door next. Night has properly fallen now, and just when you thought your eventful day was winding down, there's a soft knock at your door. The kind of knock that suggests someone doesn't want to be seen, heard, or remembered. You open the door to find Father Benedict, the local priest, standing in the shadows. His expression somehow manages to convey both spiritual authority and desperate embarrassment at the same time. This is unexpected, considering that just this morning he was preaching about the evils of consulting anyone other than God for healing. Medieval priests occupy a unique position in society. They serve as spiritual guides, moral authorities, and occasional medical advisors. They're expected to trust in God's will, recommend prayer and confession for most ailments. They generally discourage people from seeking help from practitioners who might not have the church's official approval. Which makes Father Benedict's midnight visit to your shop particularly interesting. Not to mention potentially scandalous if anyone sees him. Father Benedict shuffles into your shop with awkward grace. He's about to contradict everything he's ever said publicly about trusting in divine providence for health matters. Turns out that even men of God get toothaches. When prayer fails to provide relief, confession doesn't ease the pain, and holy water doesn't reduce the swelling, they sometimes find themselves standing in a barber's shop at midnight, hoping nobody sees them seeking earthly remedies for what might be heavenly problems. The irony is so thick you could cut it with one of your surgical knives. Which, coincidentally, is exactly what Father Benedict is hoping you'll do to his infected tooth. Here's a man who spends his days telling people to accept suffering as God's will, to trust in divine healing, and to avoid the temptations of seeking earthly solutions to spiritual problems. Yet when faced with real, immediate, unbearable pain, he's turned to a barber who learned dentistry by watching his master pull teeth and hoping for the best. Medieval dentistry makes modern root canals look like relaxing spa treatments. Your tools for tooth extraction include pliers that were probably designed for pulling nails out of wood, hammers for stubborn cases that require percussive persuasion, the kind of determination that comes from knowing there's absolutely no alternative. There's no Novocaine to numb the pain, no nitrous oxide to make the experience dreamlike. Definitely no gentle dental hygienist to hold the patient's hand and offer comforting words. There's just you, your collection of rusty but sharp instruments, and Father Benedict's faith that God will see him through the next few extremely unpleasant minutes. Assuming God isn't too annoyed about the whole seeking earthly healing situation. Medieval pain management consists of prayer, alcohol, leather straps to bite down on. The hope that patients either heal quickly or pass out before the worst part begins. You examine Father Benedict's mouth by candlelight. The swollen gum pushes his cheek out like he's hiding a walnut. The tooth is clearly beyond any salvation, earthly or divine. The infection has probably been building for weeks, causing the kind of pain that makes concentration impossible, sleep elusive, prayer increasingly difficult to focus on, when every heartbeat sends another wave of agony through his jaw. In the 21st century, this would be a routine extraction. A trained dentist would perform it in a sterile environment, with proper anesthesia, specialized tools, and antibiotics to prevent infection. Father Benedict would be back to delivering sermons within days, probably with a renewed appreciation for modern medicine, possibly a slightly less judgmental attitude toward people who seek medical care. In your world, it's about to become a medieval wrestling match. Between you, a pair of pliers, and a tooth that seems to have developed its own opinions about leaving Father Benedict's mouth. Medieval tooth extraction is less precision surgery and more controlled demolition. Success is measured not by technique, but by whether the patient remains conscious. Whether the tooth eventually comes free, preferably in one piece, but certainly in some number of pieces. You offer Father Benedict a leather strap to bite down on. This will help him manage the pain and prevent him from accidentally biting off his tongue during the procedure. You pour him a generous cup of your strongest ale, the kind that's approximately as effective as aspirin, but considerably more entertaining to watch take effect. He drinks it gratefully, probably reasoning that if God disapproves of alcohol for medical purposes, he'll have to take it up with the monks who've been brewing medicinal alesh for centuries. The extraction process involves gripping the infected tooth with your pliers and applying steady pressure. Father Benedict makes sounds that would be disturbing in any century, but which are perfectly normal for medieval medical procedures. You work carefully but firmly, knowing that hesitation only prolongs the agony, while trying not to think about the fact that one wrong move could result in a broken jaw. A tooth fragment driven into Benedict's skull, or worse complications, that medieval medicine has no ability to treat. After several minutes of what can only be described as aggressive negotiation between metal and enamel, with occasional breaks for Father Benedict to catch his breath, and possibly reconsider his theological positions on earthly healing, the tooth finally surrenders. Comes free with a wet, sucking sound that suggests it really didn't want to leave, bringing with it a considerable amount of infected material that explains why Benedict's been in such misery. As you hand Father Benedict a cloth to stop the bleeding, and another cup of ale for the pain, you can't help but appreciate the irony. Here's a man who spends his days telling people to trust in divine providence. Yet when faced with real pain, he's turned to earthly medicine provided by a barber who learned his trade through trial and error. It's a reminder that in medieval times, everyone, regardless of their station, beliefs, or public positions, was just trying to survive. In a world where pain was common and relief was rare. Whether it came from God, medicine, or a barber with steady hands and sharp tools. Father Benedict leaves your shop, walking more upright than when he entered. The infection that had been poisoning his system is gone. His faith in divine providence remains intact, though perhaps now tempered with a quiet appreciation for earthly interventions. Tomorrow he'll return to his pulpit, deliver his sermons about trusting in God's will. But tonight, he's learned that sometimes God's will includes barbers, with pliers and strong ale. The night grows deeper around your shop, and you clean your tools one final time. The day has been long, filled with procedures that would horrify modern medical professionals. Yet each patient left feeling better than when they arrived. That has to count for something in a world where hope is often the only medicine available. You bank your fire, organize your herbs one last time, and prepare for sleep. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new patients, new opportunities to practice medicine that exists somewhere between science and prayer. Night has properly fallen now, and just when you thought your eventful day was winding down, there's a soft knock at your door. The kind of knock that suggests someone doesn't want to be seen, heard, or remembered. You open the door to find Father Benedict, the local priest, standing in the shadows. His expression somehow manages to convey both spiritual authority and desperate embarrassment at the same time. This is unexpected, considering that just this morning he was preaching about the evils of consulting anyone other than God for healing. Medieval priests occupy a unique position in society. They serve as spiritual guides, moral authorities, and occasional medical advisors. They're expected to trust in God's will, recommend prayer and confession for most ailments. They generally discourage people from seeking help from practitioners who might not have the church's official approval. Which makes Father Benedict's midnight visit to your shop particularly interesting. Not to mention potentially scandalous if anyone sees him. Father Benedict shuffles into your shop with awkward grace. He's about to contradict everything he's ever said publicly about trusting in divine providence for health matters. Turns out that even men of God get toothaches. When prayer fails to provide relief, confession doesn't ease the pain, and holy water doesn't reduce the swelling, they sometimes find themselves standing in a barber's shop at midnight, hoping nobody sees them seeking earthly remedies for what might be heavenly problems. The irony is so thick you could cut it with one of your surgical knives. Which, coincidentally, is exactly what Father Benedict is hoping you'll do to his infected tooth. Here's a man who spends his days telling people to accept suffering as God's will, to trust in divine healing, and to avoid the temptations of seeking earthly solutions to spiritual problems. Yet when faced with real, immediate, unbearable pain, he's turned to a barber who learned dentistry by watching his master pull teeth and hoping for the best. Medieval dentistry makes modern root canals look like relaxing spa treatments. Your tools for tooth extraction include pliers that were probably designed for pulling nails out of wood, hammers for stubborn cases that require percussive persuasion, the kind of determination that comes from knowing there's absolutely no alternative. There's no Novocaine to numb the pain, no nitrous oxide to make the experience dreamlike. Definitely no gentle dental hygienist to hold the patient's hand and offer comforting words. There's just you, your collection of rusty but sharp instruments, and Father Benedict's faith that God will see him through the next few extremely unpleasant minutes. Assuming God isn't too annoyed about the whole seeking earthly healing situation. Medieval pain management consists of prayer, alcohol, leather straps to bite down on. The hope that patients either heal quickly or pass out before the worst part begins. You examine Father Benedict's mouth by candlelight. The swollen gum pushes his cheek out like he's hiding a walnut. The tooth is clearly beyond any salvation, earthly or divine. The infection has probably been building for weeks, causing the kind of pain that makes concentration impossible, sleep elusive, prayer increasingly difficult to focus on, when every heartbeat sends another wave of agony through his jaw. In the 21st century, this would be a routine extraction. A trained dentist would perform it in a sterile environment, with proper anesthesia, specialized tools, and antibiotics to prevent infection. Father Benedict would be back to delivering sermons within days, probably with a renewed appreciation for modern medicine, possibly a slightly less judgmental attitude toward people who seek medical care. In your world, it's about to become a medieval wrestling match. Between you, a pair of pliers, and a tooth that seems to have developed its own opinions about leaving Father Benedict's mouth. Medieval tooth extraction is less precision surgery and more controlled demolition. Success is measured not by technique, but by whether the patient remains conscious. Whether the tooth eventually comes free, preferably in one piece, but certainly in some number of pieces. You offer Father Benedict a leather strap to bite down on. This will help him manage the pain and prevent him from accidentally biting off his tongue during the procedure. You pour him a generous cup of your strongest ale, the kind that's approximately as effective as aspirin, but considerably more entertaining to watch take effect. He drinks it gratefully, probably reasoning that if God disapproves of alcohol for medical purposes, he'll have to take it up with the monks who've been brewing medicinal Alesh for centuries. The extraction process involves gripping the infected tooth with your pliers and applying steady pressure. Father Benedict makes sounds that would be disturbing in any century, but which are perfectly normal for medieval medical procedures. You work carefully but firmly, knowing that hesitation only prolongs the agony, while trying not to think about the fact that one wrong move could result in a broken jaw. A tooth fragment driven into Benedict's skull, or worse complications, that medieval medicine has no ability to treat. After several minutes of what can only be described as aggressive negotiation between metal and enamel, with occasional breaks for Father Benedict to catch his breath, and possibly reconsider his theological positions on earthly healing, the tooth finally surrenders. Comes free with a wet, sucking sound that suggests it really didn't want to leave, bringing with it a considerable amount of infected material that explains why Benedict's been in such misery. As you hand Father Benedict a cloth to stop the bleeding, and another cup of ale for the pain, you can't help but appreciate the irony. Here's a man who spends his days telling people to trust in divine providence. Yet when faced with real pain, he's turned to earthly medicine provided by a barber who learned his trade through trial and error. It's a reminder that in medieval times, everyone, regardless of their station, beliefs, or public positions, was just trying to survive. In a world where pain was common and relief was rare, whether it came from God, medicine, or a barber with steady hands and sharp tools, Father Benedict leaves your shop, walking more upright than when he entered. The infection that had been poisoning his system is gone. His faith in divine providence remains intact, though perhaps now tempered with a quiet appreciation for earthly interventions. Tomorrow he'll return to his pulpit, deliver his sermons about trusting in God's will. But tonight, he's learned that sometimes God's will includes barbers, with pliers and strong ale. The night grows deeper around your shop, and you clean your tools one final time. The day has been long, filled with procedures that would horrify modern medical professionals. Yet each patient left feeling better than when they arrived. that has to count for something in a world where hope is often the only medicine available. You bank your fire, organize your herbs one last time, and prepare for sleep. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new patience, new opportunities to practice medicine that exists somewhere between science and prayer. The candles in your shop burn low now, casting dancing shadows on the walls, where your tools hang like silent witnesses to the day's events. You've lived through 24 hours as a medieval barber surgeon, a profession that somehow managed to combine the mundane task of cutting hair with the extraordinary responsibility of deciding who lives, who dies, and who gets to keep their limbs. It's been a journey through a world where medical knowledge was scarce. Alternatives were scarcer, and hope was the most powerful medicine in your arsenal. As you extinguish the last candle and lock your shop for the night, take a moment to appreciate just how far human knowledge has traveled. The procedures you performed today, crude as they were, represented humanity's best efforts to heal, to help, to provide comfort in a world that offered precious little of any of those things. Your patients didn't come to you because you were the best option available. They came because you were the only option available. Somehow that was enough. Henrik will wake tomorrow without his infected arm, but with his life intact. Something that wouldn't have been possible without your intervention, however primitive. Brother Thomas will attribute his recovery to divine providence, never knowing that sometimes providence works through barbers with steady hands and sharp knives. Lady Margaret will face tomorrow with one less burden. Thanks to your discretion and your knowledge of herbs that wise women had whispered about for generations, Father Benedict will preach his next sermon without the distraction of tooth pain. Though he'll probably never publicly acknowledge the earthly assistance that made his spiritual duties possible. The irony of your medieval medical practice is that despite lacking almost everything modern medicine considers essential, proper training, sterile conditions, effective medications, or even basic understanding of human anatomy, you still manage to help people. Not through advanced knowledge or sophisticated equipment, but through the simple human desire to ease suffering when confronted with it. You may not have understood why your treatments worked, or even if they worked. But you tried, and in a world where trying was often the difference between hope and despair, that effort mattered more than expertise. Your shop grows quiet now. The tools cleaned and stored, the herbs sorted and sealed, the brass bowls polished and ready for tomorrow's challenges. Outside, the medieval world continues its ancient rhythms. People sleeping in beds they share with family members and livestock. Dreaming dreams untroubled by the knowledge of germs or the possibility of antibiotics. It's a world where pain is accepted as inevitable, where suffering is considered natural, and where a barber with a collection of sharp objects and questionable medical theories can be regarded as a miracle worker. As you prepare for your own rest, remember that tonight you've walked in the shoes of someone who lived in an age when human knowledge was limited. But human compassion was limitless. Every patient who entered your shop received not just treatment, but attention, care, and the precious gift of someone who was willing to try to help, even when the odds were against success. In a world before modern medicine, that willingness to care, to risk, to attempt healing in the face of uncertainty, was itself a kind of medicine. The medieval world you've experienced today was harsh, unforgiving, and often cruel. But it was also filled with people who refused to give up on each other, who shared what knowledge they had, however limited, who offered what comfort they could, however small. Your patients trusted you not because you had all the answers, but because you were there when they needed someone to try. Think about Henrik facing the choice between his arm and his life, finding the courage to trust a barber with that impossible decision. Brother Thomas, setting aside his religious training to seek earthly healing when prayer alone wasn't enough. Lady Margaret, risking everything for a chance to control her own destiny. In a world that gave women so few choices. Father Benedict, swallowing his pride and his theological objections to accept help when the pain became unbearable. Each of these people showed remarkable bravery, not just in facing their physical ailments, but in trusting someone else to help them when help was uncertain, dangerous, and potentially deadly. They chose hope over despair, action over resignation, trust over fear. In doing so, they demonstrated the same courage that drives people to seek healing today. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep in your modern world, with its hospitals and doctors and medical miracles, that would seem like magic to your medieval counterpart. Take comfort in knowing that the same spirit that drove medieval barber surgeons to help their neighbors still drives healthcare workers today. The tools have changed, the knowledge has expanded exponentially. But the fundamental human desire to heal, to comfort, and to ease suffering remains beautifully, remarkably unchanged. Rest well, dear friend, wherever you are in this wide world. May your dreams be filled with gratitude for the centuries of human progress that have brought us from rusty knives and herb-filled pouches to the medical miracles we now take for granted. May you wake tomorrow with a renewed appreciation for just how far we've traveled. How much courage it took for those early healers to take the first steps on that long journey toward understanding. Tonight, let yourself feel grateful for clean water that flows from taps, for medicines that actually work, for doctors who understand what they're doing, for a world where pain doesn't have to be endured without relief, where suffering isn't considered spiritually beneficial, where hope is backed by knowledge and knowledge is backed by centuries of human learning. Sleep peacefully, knowing that your world is far gentler than the one we've visited tonight. That the courage of people like Henrik, Thomas, Margaret, and Benedict helped build the foundation for the medical care you can access today. That every person who ever trusted a healer, however primitive their methods, contributed to the long chain of human caring that connects us all across the centuries. Sweet dreams, and thank you for joining me on this peculiar adventure through medieval medicine. May you rest deeply and wake refreshed, with a heart full of appreciation for how much light we've brought into the darkness, how much healing we've learned to offer, and how much hope we can now provide to those who need it most. Close your eyes now and let sleep come gently, knowing that tomorrow's world is kinder, safer, and more hopeful because of all who came before.